Hello everyone, my name is Nathan and today it's time for another episode of Let's Make a Game. In the previous episode we set up a bunch of buttons that we can actually pop up. It's going to be the crafting menu in the future. We also have the ability to get rid of it again with a right click. And we have the ability to lock certain buttons if we wish to do so. I took myself the liberty of setting up the first category, which is going to be the logistics category, and if we open this up we can see the first button is the conveyor belt. However, if I click this button, of course nothing is going to happen just yet. Before we dive into the episode, I would like to correct one mistake in the tile generation. Namely, we are creating the first row twice. Of course, this code right here is already being executed for the first tile with the Y position 0. So technically we are doing the first row twice. So thank you very much for making me aware of this. Okay, what I would like to achieve today is the ability to place objects with the mouse. Of course, after we selected the objects, I want to be able to rotate the objects, and depending on the rotation, the objects are going to be placed differently. To be able to exemplify this a little bit better, we're going to do it with a real object. It's going to be the conveyor belt a la Factorio. So let's get to the creation of the individual new objects and sprites that we're gonna need. First of all, I would like to have a placeholder for basically all the objects we're gonna be able to place. It's gonna be called Sprite Object Placement. Yes, indeed, that's what I'm gonna call it. I'm gonna give it a graphic in just a second. I want this to be nearby the core. There we go. Then we're also gonna set up a new category, which is gonna be called Logistics. In here, of course, we want to add another sprite. This sprite is gonna be the conveyor belt, and let's call it O1. So we can have multiple types of conveyor belts if we wanted to. This sprite we are gonna edit. It's gonna be a 32 by 32 tile thing. And this graphic, as per usual, is just gonna be a placeholder to kind of see what's going on. So I'm gonna make this very easy. We're gonna have like 2 arrows right here. Yeah, that should be good. We're gonna save that, and we're actually gonna copy this over and paste it once more in order to make a little animation. So for instance, the arrow right here would be on the top, then the next one would already be right here, and maybe a third one would just pop up right there. It's gonna be a very simple animation. Let's get rid of the additional arrows. There we go. Okay, cool. So let's switch between the two graphics. Yeah, it's not too shabby. I mean, you can kind of see what's going on. Okay, now I'm actually gonna copy this graphic over to our other object here, or other sprite, the object placement sprite. I want to paste in the graphic right here, but I want to make sure that the opacity is a little bit lower. So maybe about 60, let's go to 70, that should be good. So it's kind of like a ghost object, and of course that is image 0, that is important to remember. There we go, we have our 2 sprites. Let's tend to the new scripts that we are gonna implement. We want to create a new script, and this one is gonna be called Object Placement. There we go, let's also give it a nice title as usual. And voila, good enough, we're gonna save that. We're also gonna make a folder in the scripts folder called Logistics. There we go. And in here we want to add a script called Script Conveyor Belt 01. So this is going to be dedicated to the conveyor belt's functions. Cool, save that as well. Last but not least, we need to add a bunch of objects. We're going to create an object in the main folder called Object Placement. And of course this should have the graphics of the sprite object placement. Great, we're gonna confirm that and bring this up here. In the objects folder, I want to create a new folder, of course called Logistics. So that's the last object we have to create in the Logistics folder. It's the object Conveyor Belt 01. And this is of course gonna take on the sprites of the Conveyor Belt 01. Great, we are done with the preparations. Let's get to scripting. We want to first have a look into the draw GUI, and we want to go all the way down to where we have our sub buttons right here. The button 0101 is where we currently have our conveyor belt. So maybe let's call it that, so we can always change stuff around if we wanted to. Right here where we have the execute action, we want to add our first lines of code. We want to create an instance, and we want to create the instance at our current mouse X and mouse Y positions. And the instance, of course, is going to be the object placement. Now I'm gonna introduce a new command, something that is very, very useful, namely the with function. With the with function we can call an object, and this is gonna be the object placement. Since we only have one of that in the room at all times, there's only gonna be one of those following our mouse. And therefore we can address this object, and any code we place within that with statement is gonna be executed as if it was on the object placement itself. So that is very useful. However, if you have multiple objects with the same name, it's gonna address all of these objects at the same time. So that is kind of the limitation. Anyways, in here we want to set the image index to something. Let's actually set that in the global variables. I'm gonna open up the global variables, and in here we want to add a few things. Let's see, we want to add a few logistics variables, probably. The first one is going to be global index conveyor belt 01, which is the index we have in our object placement for the conveyor belt 01. So right here are going to be all of the ghost graphics for all the objects we can save, and therefore we have to remember what image index they have. The second variable is going to be the conveyor belt speed, I guess. Yeah, let's set that up already. The conveyor belt 01 speed is going to equal to 0.1. So it's going to be very slow. I don't know. This is probably not the end number. It's just a number. This number is going to set how fast the images are going to switch on the object. Then the last variable is more like a general variable. I'm not sure how to set it up. I'm gonna make a different title for it at the moment. It's gonna be the directions. And for this I can actually only think of one variable at the moment, which is the placement direction, and we're gonna set this by default to up. So when I first start up the game, the placement is gonna be upwards, in the upwards direction. Okay, that's enough for the global variables, so I can set the image index now using that global variable, which was index conveyor belt 01. There we go, which should be a 0 at the moment. Great, and that's all we have to do. Now let's actually test the game and see if we succeeded with that object generation. I should be able to click this logistics button and then the conveyor belt button, and behind the conveyor belt you can actually see the ghost object. It has spawned. However, it is not following our mouse. That brings us to our little object placement script. Let's go ahead and actually open this one up. We want to add a step event right here and of course add the script. Come on, let me do that. We want to add the script object placement. There we go, on the ghost object, on the object placement thing. So we're gonna open up that script and start editing the code. So the first two things I want to take care of are the rotation and also the follow mouse function. Now we need to be a little bit careful with the follow mouse function because at the moment our point of origin for this object placement thing is on the top left corner, and if we rotate this graphic it's gonna rotate around this corner and therefore get out of place. So that's one thing we have to consider, and therefore we have to consider in which direction the graphic is currently looking. Now I'm not gonna implement this right off the bat, just to show you. We want to set the follow function by setting the X position to mouse X and the Y position to mouse Y. So if we just test this for a brief second, we can see if I spawn the conveyor belt that it is now following the mouse. However, it is not adjusting to the grid and it is also not in the center of the mouse. So that's two things we have to take care of as well. To bring it to the center of the mouse, we want to set this -global.tilesize divided by 2, because we want to have it in the center of the graphic, and we can do this with both of these variables. So now it's already gonna be in the center of the mouse, but it's not gonna be snapping to the grid just yet. For that we want to use the move snap functionality, and we have to set the snapping grid, which should of course be one tile size. So it should be 32 by 32, but we set this with the global variable tile size and global tile size. So you can set this to any grid you would like. For instance, with bigger machines, you could also set it to 2 times global tile size, and then it's gonna snap to a larger grid. So let's test that just to show you how it functions. I'm gonna spawn the belt, and there we go. It's in the center of the mouse, and it is also snapping to the individual tiles, which is great. However, let's implement the rotation functionality. I think the R key is probably the best one to take for that. So we're gonna set if keyboard check released, and we want to check for the ORD R. Close up the brackets, there we go. So if we press the R button, then we want the image angle to change, and this will rotate the image. We want to rotate this by minus 90 degrees. Now I'm gonna show you the problem with that code. So there we go. If I press the R key, it is going to rotate, but it is going to be out of place. And this is a nasty little problem. You can kind of see it is out of place here as well and here as well. In order to circumvent that, we have to check in which direction this thing is looking currently. So for instance, if it is looking towards the right side, we want it to be one more tile towards the right in general. And that's what we have to achieve within this rotation functionality. So let's set up a bunch of if statements. If global.placement direction equals up, then we want something to happen, and that is the global placement direction should be right. What that will do, if we press the R button, the global direction will change from up to right. And of course that is true, considering we're changing the image angle. So that's all we have to do. Let's set the else if statement here. Actually, if global.placement direction equals down, which would be the next thing, then we want the global placement to be, or placement direction to be left, right? No, hold the phone. We first have to check right. If it is right. So after that step, if it is right, then we want it to be set to down. Okay, so now we can copy that else if statement, paste it in right there, and just change these variables. This should now be, if it is down, then we want to go left. And last but not least, just with an else statement, because there's just one more possibility, and that is global.placement direction equals up. There we go. We closed the circle. We just have to close the bracket here as well. Okay, now with this code, we have decided and know at all times in which direction the ghost image is currently looking. And therefore, we can go ahead and refine this material right here. So for instance, first of all, we want to check what the global placement currently is. The first state, of course, we want to check is the upwards direction, because we have already set this down below. These are the correct coordinates for the upwards direction. So we can close this off right here and set an else if statement. And that if is the placement direction towards the right side. If that is the case, if you remember, we want it to be moved one more tile size towards the right side. So we can basically copy the X position, but we want to add an additional tile. So global.tile size. And the Y coordinates were actually correct. So let's also copy that in. We can already check this out. So we can set the conveyor belt. It is now following us. If I hit the R key, it is still on the same tile, as you can see. Let's just set up the other else if statement here. Global.placement direction equals down. If that is the case, we want to have the same X position here, but we want to have the Y position from the original one plus an additional global.tile size. Great, and last but not least, else. That means if the direction is pointing towards the left, we don't have to define it with a else if anymore because it's the last possibility. We want the X position to be the same as the original, but the Y position be the one that is going an additional tile downwards. Great, okay, with that it should already work. Now we should be able to rotate it in any direction and it is following the mouse correctly. Conveyor belt, it is following the mouse. We are changing the direction and look at that, it is still following the mouse. It is beautiful. Now we only have to set a functionality in order to be able to place these guys. But before we do that, I want to set up one more thing, and that is the remove from cursor functionality. So in Factorio, I think it is Q that is actually a nice key. We're just gonna go with that for the time being. We can always change it. So if keyboard check released, if I can spell it, or the Q key. So if we press the Q key, we just want the instance to be destroyed, and this will remove the instance from the room and our cursor. Easy as that. Now we can finally get to the placement. Hooray! The placement is actually going to be easier than you might think. We just want to check for a mouse button click, which is the left mouse button. And additionally, we want to check if there is no instance already of this object in the room, or actually at the same position we want to place it. We can do that with an exclamation mark. This means not. So if there is no instance place at the X and Y position of our ghost object, and of course we have to do this with all the instances we don't want to be able to overlap. So eventually we have to add everything here. Every single object that we want to prevent us from placing something above it. For now it's just the conveyor belt, so maybe let's call it conveyor belt, and eventually we have to add a whole bunch of these AND statements. So maybe let's make the opening bracket right here and the closing one right there. Okay, now we want to check which image index currently the object placement is showing, because for instance if we wanted to set an inserter or any other thing than the conveyor belt, it would be on a different image index of the object placement. Therefore we first of all want to check for the conveyor belt 01. So if the image index equals to global.index conveyor belt 01, which is a variable we set in the global variables, then we want to create an instance at the XY positions, and it's going to be the object conveyor belt 01, of course. There we go, guys. That is all we had to do for the placement. Now this should already work. Now of course we are still gonna have one single problem, and that is the actual objects we are spawning are not pointing towards the directions we want them to. So I can rotate my ghost image, that is good and fine. I can also not place that because I misspelled. Yeah, look at that, globa. You are also a globa. There we go, global, it is fixed. Now hopefully this is gonna work. Conveyor belt, we're gonna spawn one in. As you can see, also the images changes so fast that we can see both of the graphics at the same time. However, if I rotate this and place it once again, you can see there are several issues still with the placement. It is not good. And it's always pointing upwards. That is also not a good thing. Now, I believe we could possibly change that within the conveyor belt script. Let's actually make sure this is on a step event right here. We want to add the conveyor belt script from the logistics folder. Cool stuff, cool stuff. And this is the last piece of code we're gonna add in today's episode. We want to check if the global.placement direction equals up. And if that is the case, we want the image angle to equal 0. Same thing with the next one. We want to check else if global.placement direction equals right. Then we want the image alpha or angle, not alpha. Oh man, I should really start copying things over more frequently, but the angle should be -90 actually. We're gonna copy this statement over. Image placement should be down. If that is the case, we want to set this to -180. And last but not least, a simple else statement. We don't have to have this shebang. The image angle should be 270 or -270. There we go. And one last thing we want to change within the belt itself. Maybe let's just add a create event and just add a piece of code directly on top of that. So this is gonna set like the image speed, right? The image speed should be equal to global dot, what did we call it? Like convey your belt 01 speed, wasn't it? I think so. Okay, cool. Now the images are not gonna be as quick, and we also adjusted everything else. I still have the feeling something went wrong. Let's maybe just test the game and see for ourselves. So, conveyor belt, we can spawn it in like so. Yeah, it is also looking much more realistic, and I can just drag the mouse and place more and more of those guys. And holy cow. Okay, if I rotate, everything is actually rotating at the moment. That is not good. Alright, of course, this thing right here, the global belt 01 functionality should maybe be on the create event. So we could theoretically include this image speed thing. Yeah, I'm gonna delete this bad boy, and we are gonna also open up this conveyor script and maybe set the image speed right here. And we want to get rid of this create event and maybe change this into the create event. So there we go. Now it's only gonna switch the direction once created. Yeah, look at that. Oh my god, this is amazing. It is actually working out. So we can place the belt in an upwards direction, and right here we will be able to switch, and right here switch again, maybe go downwards. Ah, look at that. Great guys, we have kind of working conveyor belts, and they have already a little animation to them, and we can use the Q key in order to get rid of the object. We can place more of the guys like so. Yeah, okay, that did not quite work out as I anticipated. So there are still a few errors. I actually think I know how we can fix that. I mean, this stuff right here is kind of general stuff. This doesn't only apply to the belt. So maybe we make another script right here. Or can we? No, we have to make another script. And we call this script placement defaults. I don't know, I might change this around, but let's call it placement defaults. And in here we want to copy this shebang, there we go. And now we only have the necessary stuff for the conveyor belt itself. So the script placement can go right here beneath that, and we want to apply this to the belt basically. Yeah, we want to add this in the create event. Placement defaults, that should be good. And then also we want to add the same thing right here in the create event. That was the important part, that we also have the same settings right here so that the graphics are pointing into the right direction. So there we go. Let's test the game one more time. We're gonna place a few of those guys like so, and there we go. Something like that. Get rid of it and take another conveyor belt, and there we go. It's still pointing into the correct direction. Beautiful. Problem solved, and we can move on. With that out of the way, I would say we're gonna wrap up the episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great time and see you soon. Bye bye.